Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to also say that I'm honored to be here this morning. I'm very honored to be next to my friend and colleague, Cofer Black. On behalf of the men and women of the FBI, we certainly extend our sympathy and our prayers to the victims of this horrible act on 9/11, as well as to all American victims that have been victimized by terrorism over the years, as well as our foreign citizens overseas. What I thought I would do this morning with you, since I have my prepared statement that's introduced, is to hit some highlights of some areas not specifically covered in that statement, but some issues that need to be talked about this morning. And the first is I'd like to talk briefly, real briefly, and most of you senators and Intelligence Committee members have heard some of this before, but I think it's worth bringing up what the FBI was doing in counterterrorism since 1996. I would also like to briefly discuss the relationship that we've had with the CIA over the years, particularly since 1996. Thirdly, discuss briefly the budget request, particularly the budget years 2000, 2001, and 2002. This is not a budget hearing, but there's some numbers that need to be put out, and so you clearly understand where we were coming from in the process. And then lastly, make some general observations about some perceptions that I think need to be clarified for the record. Were we doing everything we could on the aircraft or civil aviation threats? Was the FBI assuring the administration that al-Qaeda could not attack us inside the United States? I'd like to clarify those points. And then thirdly, talk about the concept of being reactive and proactive and how that has become popular post 9/11, and that we were certainly making headway in the proactive area long before 9/11. And I think you need to hear those statements, and as well as Cofer about the dedication of the men and women of the FBI. Let's start off with the history real briefly, and I will not go into a lot of detail about this. Starting in 1993 with the World Trade Center, I think everyone's realized the first World Trade Center killed 6 U.S. Citizens. The 1993 followed that up with the attempt to bomb landmarks in New York City. The whole list of terrorist cases that we focused on as the FBI, along with all the other matters in counterterrorism that were going on. The Manila Air Plot in 1994, the Oklahoma City matter in 1995, where 168 of our citizens were killed inside the United States as a result of a domestic terrorist group. O.P. Singh in November of 1995 in Saudi Arabia, which killed 5 American military personnel. June 96 Khobar Towers, wherein 19 U.S. Air Force personnel were killed. Following up with that, in 1998, we had the East African bombings where 12 U.S. citizens were killed, followed up by the Millennium Threat, where Rassam was arrested coming across the border in the state of Washington prior to the Millennium, where we charged him and other individuals in New York City. October of 2000, the USS Cole resulted in the death of 17 U.S. sailors. And then, most importantly, 9/11. To take you back where we were with the counterterrorism program at the time, way back when in 1993, and prior to that, it was a high-profiled program within the FBI, but had very few people working it. We had less than, when I was in the working counterterrorism in 1991, we had less than 50 people total in the section, which was responsible for all of counterterrorism, domestic, international, as well as special events. Over a period of time, as you well know, and particularly starting in 1996 with the 1996 anti-terrorism effective death penalty, here's what the FBI was doing. And sometimes we get lost in the shuffle here looking at what we've done since 9/11 as opposed to prior to 1996. Over a period of time, we've expanded the LEGAT programs. And we started out with a small number of LEGAT programs. I think the number was 16. We're now up to 44. Opening new LEGAT programs since 1996 was a clear indication of our focus on counterterrorism and the problems we were having. Those LEGAT offices were not opened in areas where the major concern was in organized crime or drugs. They were open in Tel Aviv and Riyadh and Islamabad, Cairo, and I could go on with the list. So it was a clear focus by us, understanding the expanded jurisdiction, which the congressional passed legislation for expanding our jurisdiction about U.S. citizens and Americans being attacked overseas, that clearly we recognize the need to have a closer and stronger and a larger presence overseas. Not in any way responsible or trying to do what the CIA does, but to to look at it from a law enforcement perspective. In addition to that, we expanded our JTTFs inside the United States, and I'm happy to report that at present we have over 56. Prior to 9/11, we had 34 on the books, and those are our law enforcement people assigned to FBI field office along with our federal partners. I think there's been a lot of discussion about the JTTFs. I think you understand that. What that does for us is not only incorporate the information sharing that we need, but it's also a force multiplier for the agents and the number of people working counterterrorism within the United States. A very worthwhile and beneficial program. Since '96, we've expanded and improved our threat warning system. And without saying much further about that, I think you understand that. We have the ability to electronically communicate with our federal, state, and local partners on threat information instantaneously. We established the Counterterrorism Center at FBI headquarters. And basically what that was bringing in 19 federal partners actually working within the FBI headquarters to look at counterterrorism cases and try to figure out what we're trying to do and where we're going. We expanded our SIOC operations in order to be able to cover more and bring in more partners during a time of crisis. And we improved our relationship with the CIA. Being the first deputy chief over at the Counterterrorism Center in 1996, it was an exchange program that you've all heard about before, and it's proved very beneficial and very helpful to us. After the East Africa bombings, we expanded to 5 rapid deployment teams that were formed in our field offices to be able to rapidly deploy in an overseas environment in order to investigate and bring responsible individuals for those acts to justice. One of the main points, though, I need to tell you about is starting in 1998, the light basically came on for us as to what we were trying to do in counterterrorism. I came to the conclusion, being promoted to Deputy Assistant Director in charge of counterterrorism, that if you looked across the board and you go back and you look specifically at counterterrorism issues, you realize that from a starting point that, one, we will never be able to stop all acts of terrorism. We could have 100,000 FBI agents and the CIA could have 10,000 more DO officers, and our probability of stopping every act of terrorism is probably not going to happen. And once you realize and take that concept for what it is, then you have to ask yourself, what does that leave you? Do you throw your hands up and you say, well, we'll just wait and react to somebody bombing us or killing American citizens, and we'll have the FBI investigate it, and we'll tell us post-event who the people were that were responsible for doing that? Well, the answer is that's not the answer. And the answer, if you look at it from a strategic standpoint, and we started doing that in 1998, what you come up with is the idea that if you can't prevent all acts, then you better be at the highest capacity that you can possibly be. This led us into a strategic thinking about what does that mean for our 56 field offices? What does that mean for the FBI at FBI headquarters? And through a long process called Maximum Capability by 05, MaxCap 5, we started down that road to look at it and to say that the FBI does a tremendous job in the area of investigations after a crime has been committed. We put 1,000 agents or more in East Africa. Oklahoma City, we mobilized probably 35 different operation centers throughout the country. But if you look at it from a logical standpoint, those things will never get you in the prevention business. It will tell you who did it and how they did it, but it's always post-event. So we started out in a process of trying to develop our capability in our field offices and understanding what the threat is over the horizon. And it's the hardest thing ever tried to do in a bureaucracy as large as ours. We have great people, but great people sometimes have a understanding that change is very disruptive and change is hard. So we started in '98 to look at this, and the only way we could do it was to look at how capable our field offices were. And if our field officers were not capable of responding, investigating, doing everything they can to include resources, technology, then we would be vulnerable for attack again at the level inside the United States. In addition to looking at our field offices, and we started a specific process to do that, with several reports coming back to me that evaluated where we were in all our field offices and what capabilities they had, and had a very simple color system, red, yellow, and green, that we were able to take that. But it's not fair to just evaluate our field offices. We also looked internally within ourselves at FBI headquarters. And we looked at how well are we doing in the intelligence business. of sharing information, obtaining information, processing information, and what does intelligence mean? And intelligence to law enforcement is different than intelligence to the CIA. And how do you process intelligence? And our thinking of intelligence was tell us what's happened in post cases. And that's never going to get you into the prevention business if you continue to look post. So we evaluated ourselves and said we needed great help in the intelligence arena. The third area we looked at headquarters on the criteria was a technology piece, and I think you've all been briefed on those areas of concern, and we realized we were well short of what we needed in technology. The ability to share information and pass information back and forth electronically, not only with our federal partners, but with our state and local partners as well. And then fourth, we looked internally and evaluated ourselves internally, not on reactive stuff, but on being proactive on the liaison side. How well are we sharing information? What are our relationships with our foreign partners? What are our relationships with our federal partners? And there were areas of improvement that we needed in all those areas. And once you identify what your capabilities are and have a standard to be able to measure it and say we're at this percentage and this is where we need to go, it helps you formulate budget requests. It helps you formulate what you need in technology. It helps you to formulate exactly from a national program of what you're trying to do. In 1998, we declared Osama bin Laden the #1 priority in the al-Qaeda organization within the FBI. In early spring of '99, he's placed on our top 10 list. And so we hear things all the time that the FBI wasn't focused on counterterrorism. In addition to that, in November 1999, at no one's request but an internal review by the FBI, we created the Counterterrorism Division. In addition to that, with our Investigative Services Division. And so we were singularly focused on that and trying to run a national program and being able to raise our capability in order to prevent acts of terrorism is the #1 thing. We will never, ever move away from being reactive. We understand that. And that's what people want to talk about most of the time is how's that case going in East Africa? Or how's the USS Cole investigation going? But if you step back and look at it strategically, you need to have people thinking beyond the horizon. And that's very difficult for all of us. And it's particularly difficult for law enforcement people. And it's very easy post-event to figure out how the kidnapping occurred. I won't say it's very easy, but you have a lot more leads post 9/11 as to how they did this, as opposed to prior to 9/11. And there were red flags in the ocean out there. There were a lot of red flags prior to 9/11. And once 9/11 occurred, it's real easy to go back and pick out the red flag in the ocean of red flags and say, you should have done this, or you should have seen this. And a threat to aviation is certainly one of the areas that we received threat reporting on. It was not the only area. We had threats to malls, threats to power plants, threats to assassinations. Across the board, we have threats coming in every day. And if something happened today concerning a small boat attacking somewhere in one of our harbors in the U.S., we probably have information about that. So it's a massive information, and it's a sea of threats. And it's like working against a maze. And if you know where the end point of a maze is, it's certainly easier to work your way back to the starting point than trying to go through the maze and sort out all the red flags. I'm not defensive whatsoever. I encourage you to look back, look. I encourage people to ask us questions and said, why didn't you do this? Or why didn't you do that? But the men and women of the FBI that were working this in conjunction with COFR's folks were working full time. We were not sitting on our hands. We were not asleep over there thinking that, well, this can't possibly happen inside the United States. We were aware of that. Just a couple other quick points I need to make. We also realized prior to 9/11 that information sharing with our state and locals is a key piece. We have 600,000 law enforcement people in the United States. And as a result of October of 2000, we initiated a pilot project in St. Louis where we would actually load, hopefully if we get all the kinks worked out, federal information as well as all state and local information in order to electronically be able to use that information to connect the smallest dots in the terrorism program. An individual stopped in St. Louis County might be the key to unraveling a terrorist plot. And that requires time and effort and technology to do that. It's not a technology issue, but it's a project that needs to be done. Post 9/11, we initiated a similar project in San Diego. We also have one going in the Northwest with 3 states, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. We do not have all the correct answers on those projects yet, but as we continue to work, our information sharing will get better. Just a couple other key points over a period of time since the early 90s is the renditions. The renditions are key in law enforcement, but at the same time, it is a very difficult task to render people back to the United States. We were successful in Shirasaki coming out of Nepal, and several key East African fugitives that we were able to get out, working with not only with the CIA, but State Department as well as our DOD. The key point here is the FBI was a law enforcement effort, trying to investigate, bring to justice under our rules, our Constitution, crimes that were committed against American citizens. And a key point to remember in this war in terrorism, and particularly Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, is the fact that sometimes the idea that not only is it a law enforcement issue, it is also a national security issue. We can lock up 15 people for bombing us in East Africa. We can indict and charge individuals in the USS Cole, or we can indict and charge individuals in whatever terrorist act that goes on. But this will not stop this. This is a national security issue, and I'm not advocating passing the mantle from law enforcement into a national security issue. But as Senator Shelby, you well remember, on a briefing that we had with you, me and the director of the FBI, where we talked about a very sensitive matter where we were close to getting indictment, former Senator Kerry from Nebraska turned to my director and said, I'd really like to thank you for this effort that the FBI has put into this, but actually this is a national security issue. This matter should be taken to the administration and taken to DOD, because we're never going to stop it just solely through the law enforcement side. And so that's a key point I think we should remember and talk about. The other things that, real briefly, are the resources and budget. This is not in any way a criticism. This is not in any way a reflection upon what we were trying to do and what we ended up getting, or an excuse of what happened about 9/11. But I would turn your attention to our request, the FBI director's request in the 00 budget. I'm not going to talk about what made it actually up here, the numbers, but I can tell you what I, head of the counterterrorism division, requested. And I'll be real brief about this, and I only have a couple of more points. In 00, the FBI requested 180 agents and 684 support in the 00 budget. What comes out the other end, approved by Congress, is 5 support people. In the 01 budget, we asked for 30 agents, 397 support people. And what comes out the other end is 0. In the 02 budget, we asked for 203 agents, 104 support. And what comes out the other end is 8 agents and 56 support people. If you add those figures up for just 3 years, you come up with close to 2,000 individuals that we asked for. The breakdown of that, about 430 agents and 1,482 support people. And what we got on the other end was 69. That begs the question, and I'm not here to answer that question, is would this have made a difference prior to 9/11? Would we be here talking about the Phoenix memo or something else if the identification and the recognition of the resources we needed? And I know Congress had other issues, and I'm a realist. We had other programs going. We had a drug program. We had a gang problem. But yet at the same time, it comes down to resources. And what we asked for and what we received was the figures. Does that explain why, and we can discuss these figures, why we only had 1 strategic analyst looking at UBL? Does it explain the number of people that we had working UBL? I'll leave that for further discussions. And I think, Mr. Chairman, I think Congress recognized the need that we needed resources, because in the 02 supplemental, right after 9/11, we received 297 agents and 823 support people. I'll leave that at that. The last area in closing is we've heard some talk, some perceptions that we didn't do enough about the airlines threats. And I think I've covered that. The airlines threats were out there, as well as the mall threats, as well as the suicide bomber in 1997, as you recall, that attempted to go in the New York subway and blow himself up, as well as other things, continued, repeated threats that we received in working with the agency. I'm not here to say that that there were not clues or red flags that we should have picked on, but it is a sea of red flags. The other thing is that there's a perception that we, the FBI, never briefed the administration that al-Qaeda could attack us in the United States. I will tell you that perception is absolutely incorrect. If you looked at just the fact that we'd been attacked in the World Trade Center in '93, if you looked at Oklahoma City, if you looked at the Rassam individual who was going to set off a bomb in LAX, you understand clearly that we were vulnerable in the United States. Looking at the pattern before 9/11, of all the pattern, I was convinced we were going to be attacked. As a matter of fact, we had a discussion with the director about this prior to, long before September 11th, about pre-positioning people overseas, FBI agents. And I was convinced at that time that the probability of attack against us was great. But I was also, majority of my thought process was that it would be overseas. But we had never any time told anyone that we could not be attacked inside the United States. The last 2 points continues to be that we're all reactive. And if you've heard some of this, and I'll be glad to explain this more, we were moving in the right direction and being proactive. We were trying to look over the horizon. We will always be reactive because of the crimes we do, but we also have people that look and think about where is the next threat and how's it coming and what we should do about it. And in closing, I guess the best thing is that somehow or another people think that we were asleep at the switch. We have dedicated men and women. We have individuals, field agents, support people, professional staff that have absolutely worked themselves almost to death over this problem. And just as Kofer said, I'm extremely proud of those individuals. And I'm extremely proud of what the work that the FBI has done since the early 90s in the counterterrorism program. And we don't do everything always right. But in the realm of counterterrorism, that's a judgment that we're based upon or evaluated on. I've used this analogy before. We're like a soccer goalkeeper. We can block 99 shots, and no one wants to talk about any of those. And the only thing anyone wants to talk about is the one that gets through. And I understand that. I'm not asking for sympathy on that, but I'm telling you what reality is. And so our folks are very dedicated and work very hard about this. The last point is somehow or another words out that somehow that the FBI and CIA conspired or had information prior to 9/11 that could have prevented this, and that we were not interested in pursuing that. I can't tell you how I wish we could have prevented this. I worry about that. And over the period of time, even prior to 9/11, it was always the thought process of what have we missed? What are we doing that we need to do better? But I'm not responsible for the individuals, the 19 individuals that got on those planes and the al-Qaeda organization that pulled this plan off. However, I think it's important to remember that we did the best we absolutely could with the resources we had. I wish we would have had technology that could have instantaneously evaluated all the documents. I wish we'd had 150 analysts assigned to FBI headquarters. We didn't. But we did the best we could. And that's not being defensive at all, Mr. Chairman. That's being very honest with you. I thank you for this opportunity. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.